My father spent 14 years locked behind the thick steel doors of the Barry Telford State Penitentiary, located right outside Texarkana, Texas. Recently I took an interest in the darker events that have happened to various family members, and sat down to ask him if he had any chilling stories or experiences he could share about his time he spent incarcerated, anything that he hadn't shared with me before. I was both pleased and horrified, as for the next 2 hours he divulged some truly chilling and grotesque tales. I will just let you know now that some of these stories are graphic, and if you have a weak stomach, I'd advise you not to read further. For the rest of you, I won't sparse details and I'll lay them out exactly as he laid them out to me. My dad was sent to the Telford unit a few months after his 21st birthday, sentenced to 20 years for armed robbery. It is a maximum security prison designed to mostly hold suspected gang members and violent criminals. The first day is a total shock to your system. You are stripped and cavity searched coming in and out of every room, you have a bedtime, you are timed at meals, and thrown into a cell with 3 other inmates telling you the house rules and which bunk is yours. Then laying in bed that first night. That's when it hits you that this is home, that this is your life now. Out of anything I can recall, that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness, that loss of freedom, that's the scariest part of prison. He told me that as the months pass you get used to your routine, you start to need the structure, even crave it. He said he decided to make the best of it, learn as many skills as he could, and stay as busy as possible. One of his vocational skills he picked up was plumbing, and soon became the in-house plumber for a building. Now the way the prison is set up is that there is an A building and a B building. Inside each building there are 10 cell houses. Each cell house contains 12 cells that can hold anywhere from 1 to 4 inmates each. In the middle of each cell house is the rec room where the cells all open up to, and this is where the inmates spend most of their free time. In addition to the cell houses, each building also contains several solitary wings, labeled from A seg to Z seg. When I first got there, everyone kept joking that if I stepped out of line the guards would send me to M seg. One day I asked a buddy, who had been locked up for 15 years already when I got there, why people kept talking about M seg, and not any of the other seg wings. Look, his buddy told him, people who have extended stays in M just don't come back the same, some don't come back at all. The guards know it, that's why they always fill M last, or put new guys there who they think might be troublemakers. A night in M and you'll straighten your act up real quick. I've never been there myself, but I talked to a couple inmates who have, and they both told me the same thing, something evil lives in that place. So like I said, my dad had become the on-call plumber for a building. He said it was about 6 months into the job when he had his first encounter with M seg. Whenever a toilet was stopped up or something was leaking, the guards would just knock on my door and lead me to the problem. It was an around-the-clock type of thing. I didn't mind though, any excuse to get out of the cell was fine by me. Plus you get your own cell since you'd be coming in and out at all hours of the night and day, so that was a nice perk as well. Anyway, one night there is a knock on my door and the guard tell me to get dressed, Rochelle, we need you in seg. I get up, the guard opens my door and we start heading down to seg. It's a real mess down there. I've seen a lot of shit in my day, but this is crazy, the guard told my dad as he led him down the connecting corridors. Just make sure you wear your gloves and booties, Rochelle. My dad was curious and asked the guard what had happened. Looney Tune on suicide watch, I guess somehow must have snuck in a piece of metal. Look, I shouldn't tell you this, but I don't want you to be surprised when you get in there. Crazy, cut off his own genitals. He threw his testicles out on the run, but we can't find his penis, and that's where you come in. When they reached their destination, there was another guard standing outside with an inmate holding a mop waiting to clean up after my dad was finished. My dad said when they opened the door to M seg it was almost hauntingly dark. 4 or 5 dim overhead lights ran down the hallway but seemed to act more like spotlights and gave off practically no ambient light. He said there was a trail of blood leading towards the back of the corridor. Each seg block had 14 cells with solid steel doors. Each door had a small window that could be opened and closed from the outside and a tray slit which the guy must have used to toss his testicles out. As he got closer, he could see that blood was running out from a cell towards the end of the block through a small gap under the door. "Open 13, the guard yelled to another guard behind a glass window controlling the electronic locks. When I went into that cell, I couldn't believe how much blood there was. It was on the walls and the ceiling, the entire mattress pad was doused in it. The toilet was flooded up to the brim and it looked like it was filled with blood. I used a cup to transfer the bloody water into buckets until I could start to see the silhouette of something under the water. I could see a big wad of toilet paper, so I pulled it out and sat it on the floor. I could tell something was inside it. As I started to slowly unravel the wad, all of a sudden I started hearing this noise coming from the air vents, tunk tunk tunk. It sounded like someone crawling or trying to sneak through them almost. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I'll get back to that later. Anyway, I unrolled the paper and sure enough the guy's pecker was right there. The guard took it and dropped it in a bag of ice, and after making sure the toilet flushed, he started leading my dad back to the entrance of MSEG. When we got down the hall waiting for the exit door to open, all the lights went out. "Shit," muttered the guard, against the wall inmate. I stood back against the wall, my dad continued, and as the guards tried to figure out what was going on, I heard that noise in the vents again. It was coming from the cell I had just come out of. Tunk tunk tunk. I've seen and heard a lot in my years, not a lot gets under my skin, but I was shaking like a leaf the whole way out of MSEG. I don't think I took a breath until I walked out the block doors and heard them shut behind me. I finally worked up the nerve to ask that guard what the hell was in those vents. "I don't know, Rochelle. Warden'll tell you there's nothing in those vents. All I can tell you is that whatever it is, it's evil." My dad said he had 3 main jobs during his time at Telford, the first of which was as the on-call plumber, the second was maintaining the boilers down in the boiler room, and the last thing he did before being released was to take care of and train the bloodhounds. This first story takes place during his time with the bloodhounds. I had gotten in pretty good with the guards. After so many years with the same old faces, you develop a friendship almost. The guys with good behavior anyway. A lot of people see the guards as enemies and just really like to make it hard on themselves. I myself tried to look at the prison as my workplace and the guards as my co-workers and supervisors. It helped me to think about like that, distracted me from the fact that I was in cage, plus you were allowed more freedoms when the guards liked you. It wasn't uncommon for the guards that had been there a while to treat us guys doing serious time more like equals than they treat a lot of the rookie guards. In prison, respect is earned by years, not titles and badges. As I was saying, I had made friends with the senior officer over at the kennels, and when the job opened up after one of the tenured hounds had puppies, he let me fill the position. I would feed and train the dogs early every morning and again late every evening. They just attached a leg monitor to my leg and let me run the dogs through a big fenced-in wooded area. I would set up obstacles with dummies, going out and hiding them in a tree or in a hole, marking their scent in various places along the way. At first they had a lot of trouble and would get distracted by any kind of noise or animal smell, but after a while they were so good I couldn't trick them no matter what I tried. Sometimes the guards would have me hide myself. I'd climb a tree, jump to another, take a piss on some leaves, double back and double back again, anything to break the scent trail. But damned if they didn't find me. There's not a lot I have done in my life outside of having you boys that I'm proud of, but man was I proud of those dogs. So one night we were doing a run in the dark, which we practiced from time to time. I went out first and I hid several dummies, 4 or 5 of them, and then I hid myself. The object of the game was for them to find me and not go after the dummies, which I would rub dog food or pheromones on, stuff a domestic dog would head right for. After I hid the last one, I circled back using all of my usual tricks and found a nice climbing tree where I decided to camp out at. From there I just waited to hear their booming barks blast through the trees. Sure enough, not 10 minutes had passed and I could already hear their barks closing in on me. At this point I'm looking around to see if I could spot them yet. Then off a little ways in the distance, probably 30 yards from me, I could see them circling a tree through the fog and darkness. I figured it would be any minute now that they'd be at the base of my tree, letting the guards running along behind them know where I was. But to my surprise, they just stayed where they were, barking up the wrong tree. That's when I saw it, the shape of a man about 20 feet up in the branches of the tree the hounds were circling. I didn't put a dummy in that tree, did I? I asked myself. It was dark when I hid them, so it was possible I guessed, but how high it was. I hadn't put a dummy more than 10 feet off the ground and this thing was up twice as high. I could only make out its silhouette against the moonlight. I noticed it was shaped similar to a man but not exactly like a man. Its limbs seemed too long, and they just dangled lifelessly and limp as it straddled a branch, legs hang off either side. Right then I just about fell off my perch when its head moved and now seemed to be staring straight at me. It started tilting its head slowly from left to right over and over. Then all at once it stopped moving completely before raising one of its lengthy arms, and with a handful of fingers that had to be at least a foot long, it began waving at me. My heart was pounding. I clicked my ankle bracelet 3 times, indicating to the guards there was trouble. A few tense moments later, with me staring at this thing and it staring at me, I heard the guards yelling out to me and calling the dogs off, coming from the direction I was staring in, directly behind the thing in the tree. It must have heard them too, because I swear to you it twisted its head completely backwards and stared in the direction of the oncoming guards, simultaneously waving at me the entire time. Here. Here. I'm over here. I yelled out, taking my eyes off the creature for 2, maybe 3 seconds. I could see a slew of flashlights beaming out from the woods ahead, bathing the leaf carpet below in a yellow gleam. I looked back up to the tree where it was, but it was gone. When I told the guards what I saw, they thought I was joking or just seeing things, but the senior officer on duty, S.O. Cheney, said he had seen something too. They radio into HQ, thinking an inmate might be on the loose, and the entire prison goes on immediate lockdown to do a count, only to find that nobody was missing. While they were doing the count inside, me and the 5 guards out at the kennels just stood there waiting for the okay to return me to my cell. Maybe it was a civilian, I remember one of them suggesting. I've heard of a lot of people trying to break out of prison, but who on earth would want to break in? One of the guards asked rhetorically. Any reports of orangutans escaping from the zoo? Joked another as the rest started laughing. Orangutans don't fly, interjected S.O. Cheney in a clearly shaken but at the same time serious voice. He had been quiet ever since we'd left the woods. He had this nervous, concerning look on his face. What do you mean? Replied a puzzled guard as the laughter abruptly stopped. Look, Cheney sighed, orangutans don't fly. And whatever the fuck was in that tree. It flew out of there, and it wasn't a fucking bird, either. Everyone got quiet and the atmosphere became uneasy as we stood outside the kennels. Nobody had any reasonable answers as to what it could have been. We stopped doing night runs for a while after that, and when we started back I never went that deep into the woods again. Still gives me shivers to think about. So this next bit are some things my dad was told by a lifer, and range from more creepy crawly to spooky, but I thought it was all interesting and bizarre enough to share. One of the guys who used to preach a lot in the chapel was a guy named Terry who was serving life for homicide. Before checking into the slammer he was a dentist, but looking at him now you'd never guess this tattooed, hardened criminal used to be this little white-collar, upper-class man rinsing teeth and filling cavities. Somehow he finds out one of his buddies had been fooling around with his wife. But his buddy didn't know he knew, see? Well, one day Terry invites him down to the dentist office for some free dental work. When he gets his buddy in the chair, he starts pumping him full of that laughing gas dentists like use, and to hear Terry tell it, he gave him nearly the whole damn bottle. Anyway, after about 20 minutes of breathing in this gas, Terry's buddy is out of it. He is basically paralyzed, for all intents and purposes. Terry proceeds to start pulling out the guy's teeth one by one and dropping them into the guy's throat. Terry said his buddy was awake the whole time, just laughing uncontrollably while tears streamed down his cheeks, his eyes letting Terry know he was completely aware of what's happening. Before long, he starts choking on his own teeth and he suffocates to death. After everyone found out about Terry's case, they started calling him Dr. Giggles. After chapel, me, Terry, and a couple of other guys would swap stories and shoot the shit from time to time. One Sunday, we got to talking about some of the weirdest things we'd seen and heard since coming to prison. Now, Terry worked in the infirmary doing everything from admitting and discharging inmates, to assisting the doctor during surgery, to applying bandages and helping them to the restroom, things like that. He'd seen pretty much every injury you can think of, from rapes, to stabbings, to overdoses. There wasn't a whole lot that surprised him as far as that stuff goes. Anyway, he told me about one guy who had managed to off himself in a way that shocked even old Dr. Giggles himself. This skinny little white guy gets carried in on a stretcher one day after collapsing and seizing up coming in from yard. Terry told me, he's foaming from the mouth and convulsing something awful. I'd seen him around before, quiet guy, kept to himself, never got in any trouble, an ideal inmate. Well, Doc has me strip him down and we start looking for track marks or anywhere he might have stuck a needle, thinking this was probably an overdose or some kind of reaction to an illegal substance. But we search him head to toe and don't find any marks, so immediately we start thinking he must have ingested something. One of the nurses pulls out a syringe and starts drawing blood to run a quick chem test, and that's when we hear it, this noise, like a baby rattle, except it's coming from this guy on the table. We all just looked at each other trying to make sure we weren't just hearing things and that everyone else could hear it too. So anyway, we lean in close and start listening for where it's coming from, the guy still shaking as hard as a 10.0 earthquake. That's when we realize the noise is coming from beneath him. Two nurses flip him over and the rattling, sure enough, gets louder. "Doc, I think that's coming from his ass," I said, not believing what I was saying. Doc has the nurses split his cheeks, and right there poking about an inch out of his asshole, I shit you not, was a rattlesnake tail. We had to call in animal control to remove the snake and the local vet for an anti-venom, but by the time they got there the guy died right there on that stretcher. Animal control gets there and pulls a foot-long rattler out of his ass, and hand to God, the damn thing was still alive. But its mouth was tied shut with a piece of twine, so we knew it couldn't have bitten him like that. Doc does an X-ray on the guy's corpse and none of us could believe what we saw. There was a second snake, and it had made its way all the way up into his lower intestine. X-ray shows a second piece of twine too, that had unwrapped from the snake's mouth somehow, and I guess the snake just went to town and started biting at this guy's insides. Doc said it looked like upwards of 30 different injection marks, and that he was a dead man even if we'd gotten the anti-venom in time. Best we could figure is he saw a snake's nest out in the yard, and either he was trying to sneak them inside to keep them as pets, or maybe he was gonna use them on someone who was causing him problems, but in the end all we could do was speculate. My dad told me he told Terry about his experiences in MSEG, and that Terry just nodded along completely unfazed, and then told him about his own experiences with the man in the vents. "Look," Terry began, "I've been working the infirmary for nearly 16 years. There's a reason the guys in the firm call it Seg de Mort. I've seen more people wheeled in here on stretchers from MSEG than all the other Seg blocks combined, and it ain't exactly like they're packing the house over there, you know? And every time, the air blowing from the vents in the operating room starts to smell like death, old death. Like something that died a long time ago, like decay. It got to the point that any time we heard someone was being admitted in from MSEG we would tape off all the vents. We tried just closing them off at first, but they always open back up if you didn't seal them shut. I think it likes to watch its victims die, the thing in the ducts, I mean. You can hear it moving around in there, going from vent looking for an opening, for a hole in the tape, trying to see.